I'm gonna read Part 1, Chapter 1. At the beginning of July, during an extremely hot spell towards evening, a young man left the closet he rented from tenants in Blank Lane, walked out to the street slowly as if indecisively headed for the bridge. He had safely avoided meeting his landlady on the stairs. His closet was located just under the roof of a tall 5-storied house and was more like a cupboard than a room. As for the landlady from whom he rented this closet with dinner and maid service included, she lived one flight below in separate rooms, and every time he went out he could not fail to pass by the landlady's kitchen, the door of which almost always stood wide open to the stairs. And each time he passed by, the young man felt some painful and cowardly sensation which made him wince with shame. He was over his head in debt to the landlady and was afraid of meeting her. It was not that he was so cowardly and downtrodden, even quite the contrary, but for some time he had been in an irritable, intense state resembling hypochondria. He was so immersed in himself and had isolated himself so much from everyone that he was afraid not only of meeting his landlady, but of meeting anyone at all. He was crushed by poverty, but even his strange circumstances had lately ceased to burden him. He had entirely given up attending to his daily affairs and did not want to attend them. As a matter of fact, he was not afraid of any landlady, whatever she might be plotting against him, but to stop on the stairs, to listen to all sorts of nonsense about this commonplace rubbish, which he could not care less about, all this badgering for payment, these threats and complaints, and have to dodge all the while and make excuses, lie, oh no, better just steal cat-like down the stairs somehow and slip away unseen by anyone. This time, however, as he walked out to the street, even he was struck by his fear of meeting his creditor. I want to attempt such a thing, and at the same time, I'm afraid of such trifles, he thought with a strange smile. Yes. Man has it all in his hands, and it all slips through his fingers from sheer cowardice. That is an axiom. I wonder, what are people most afraid of? A new step, their own new word. That's what they're most afraid of. I babble too much, however. That's why I don't do anything, because I babble. However, maybe it's like this. I babble because I don't do anything. I've learned to babble over this past month, lying in a corner day in and day out thinking about Cuckoo Land. Why on earth am I going now? Am I really capable of that? Is that something serious? No, not serious at all. I'm just toying with it for the sake of fantasy. A plaything. Yes, a plaything, if you like. It was terribly hot out, and moreover it was close, crowded, lime, scaffolding, bricks, dust everywhere, and that special summer stench known so well to every Petersburger who cannot afford to rent a summer house. All at once these things unpleasantly shook the young man's already overwrought nerves. The intolerable stench from the pot houses, especially numerous in that part of the city, and the drunkards he kept running into even though it was a weekday, completed the loathsome and melancholy coloring of the picture. A feeling of the deepest revulsion flashed for a moment in the young man's fine features. Incidentally, he was remarkably good-looking, taller than average, slender and trim, with beautiful dark eyes and dark blonde hair. But soon he lapsed, as if into deep thought, or even more precisely, into some sort of oblivion, and walked on no longer noticing what was around him and not wishing to notice. He only muttered something to himself from time to time, out of that habit of monologues he had just confessed to himself, and at the same moment he was aware that his thoughts sometimes became muddled, and that he was very weak. It was the second day that he had had almost nothing to eat. He was so badly dressed that another man, even an accustomed one, would have been ashamed to go out in such rags during the daytime. However, the neighborhood was such that it was hard to cause any surprise with one's dress. The proximity of the Haymarket, the abundance of certain establishments, a population predominantly of craftsmen and artisans who clustered in these central Petersburg streets and lanes, sometimes produced such a motley of types in the general panorama that to be surprised at meeting any sort of figure would even have been strange. With so much spiteful contempt that was already stirred up in the young man's soul that, for all his sometimes very youthful touchiness, he was least ashamed of his rags in the street. It was a different matter when he met some acquaintances or former friends whom he generally disliked meeting, and yet when a drunk man who was just then being taken to the street in an enormous car harnessed to an enormous car horse. No one knew why or where suddenly shouted him as he passed by, "Hey, you German hatter!" pointing at him and yelling at the top of his lungs. The young man suddenly stopped and convulsively clutched his hat. It was a tall, cylindrical Zimmermann hat, all but worn out, quite faded, all holes and stains, brimless and dented so that it stuck out at an ugly angle. Yet it was not shame, but quite a different feeling, even more like fear that seized him. "I just knew it," he muttered in confusion. "It's just as I thought. That's the worst of all. Some stupid thing like that, some trivial detail can ruin the whole scheme. Yes, the hat is too conspicuous, ludicrous, and never conspicuous. My rags certainly call for a cap, even if it's some old pancake, not this monster. Nobody wears this kind and can be noticed a mile away. And remembered, above all, it will be remembered later, so there's evidence for you. Here one must be as inconspicuous as possible. Details. Details above all. It's the details that ruin everything always. He didn't have far to go. He even knew how many steps it was from the gate of his house. Exactly 730. Once, when he was far gone in his dreaming, he had counted them. At that time he did not yet believe in these dreams of his, and he chaffed himself with their ugly but seductive audacity. Whereas now, a month later, he was beginning to look at them differently, and despite all those taunting monologues about his own powerlessness and indecision had grown used, even somehow involuntarily, to regarding the ugly dream as a real undertaking, though he still did not believe himself. Now he was even going to make a trial of his undertaking, and at every step his excitement grew stronger and stronger. With a sinking heart and nervous trembling, he came up to a most enormous house that faced a canal on one side and a street on the other. The house was all small apartments inside and was inhabited by all sorts of working people, tailors, locksmiths, cooks, various Germans, girls living in their own petty clerkdom, and so on. People kept coming and going, darting through both gateways and across both courtyards. 3 or 4 caretakers worked there. The young man was very pleased not to have met any one of them, and slipped inconspicuously from the gate directly to the stairway on the right. The stairway was dark and narrow, a back stairway, but he had known and made a study of all that before, and he liked the whole situation. In that darkness, even a curious glance was no danger. If I'm so scared now, what if it really should somehow get down to the business itself? He thought involuntarily, going up the 4th floor. There, his way was blocked with some porters, ex-soldiers who were moving furniture out of one apartment. He already knew from before that a German official had been living in the apartment with his family. It means the German is now moving out, which means that on the 4th floor, the stairway on this landing for a while, only the old woman's apartment will be left occupied. That's good, just in case. He thought again, and rang at the old woman's apartment. The bell jingled feebly as though it were made out of brass and not tin. Not of brass, but of tin. I'm sorry. In the small apartments of such houses, almost all the bells are like that. He had forgotten the ring of this bell, and all its peculiar ring seemed suddenly to remind him of something and bring it clearly before him. He jumped so weak had his nerves become this time. In a short while, the door was opened a tiny crack. The woman lodger was looking at the visitor through the crack with obvious mistrust, and only her little eyes could be seen glittering from the dark. But seeing a number of people in the lane, she took courage and opened the door all the way. The young man stepped across the threshold into the dark hallway, divided by a partition, behind which was a tiny kitchen. The old woman stood silently before him, looking at him inquiringly. She was a tiny, dry little crone, about 60, with sharp, spiteful little eyes and a small, sharp nose. She was bareheaded, and her colorless and only slightly graying hair was thickly greased. Her long, thin neck, which resembled a chicken's leg, was wrapped in some flannel rags, and despite the heat, a fur-trimmed jacket, completely worn out and yellow with age, hung loosely from her shoulders. The old crone coughed and groaned all the time. The young man must have glanced at her with some peculiar glance, because the earlier mistrust suddenly flashed in her eyes again. Raskolnikov, student, I was here a month ago. The young man hastened to mutter with a half-bow, recalling that he should be more affable. I remember, dearie. I remember very well that you were, the old man said indistinctly, still without taking her inquiring eyes from his face. So again, ma'am, on the same little business, Raskolnikov continued, a bit disconcerted and surprised by the old woman's mistrust. Though maybe she's always like that, and I didn't notice last time, he thought, with an unpleasant feeling. The old woman was silent for a moment, as if hesitating, then she stepped aside and, pointing towards the door to the room, allowed the visitor to go ahead and saying, "Come in, dearie." The small room into which the young man walked, with yellow paper, geraniums, and muslin curtains in the windows, was at that moment brightly lit by the setting sun. The sun would be shining the same way then. Flashed as if inadvertently through Raskolnikov's mind. With a quick glance, he took in everything in the room in order to study and remember the layout as well as possible, but there was nothing special in the room. The furniture, all very old and of yellow wood, consisted of a sofa with a huge curved wooden back, a round table in an oval shape in front of the sofa, a dressing table with a mirror between the windows, chairs against the walls, and 2 or 3 cheap prints in yellow frames portraying German damsels with birds in their hands. That was all the furniture there was. In the corner, an oil lamp was burning in front of a small icon. Everything was clean. Both furniture and floor were polished to a high luster. Everything shone Lizaveta's work, the young man thought. There was not a speck of dust to be found in the whole apartment. It's like an old widow's keep everything so clean. Raskolnikov continued to himself, and he cast a curious sidelong glance at a cotton curtain hanging in the doorway to the second tiny room where the old woman's bed and chest of drawers stood, and where he had not yet peeked even once. The whole apartment consisted of these two rooms. "What do you want?" the old crone said sternly, coming into the room and as for forcing him directly in front of him so as to look him directly in the face. "I brought something to pawn. Here, ma'am." And he took an old flat silver watch from his pocket. The globe was engraved on the back. The chain was made of steel. "But the time is up for your last pledge. It was a month to the day before yesterday. I'll give you interest for another month. Be patient." "That's as I please, dearie, whether I'll be patient or sell your thing right now." "How much will you give for the watch?" "Alyona Ivanovna." "You bring me trifles, dearie. In my opinion, it's not worth anything. Last time I gave you 2 rubles for your ring, and you could buy one new from a jeweler for 1.5 rubles. "Give me 4 rubles anyway. I'll redeem it. It's my father's. I'll be getting money soon." 1.5 rubles, sir. "And interest paid in advance if you like, sir." 1.5 rubles, the young man exclaimed. "As you please." And the old woman held the watch out to him. The young man took it and became so angry that he simply wanted to leave. But he at once thought better of it, remembering that there was nowhere else to go, and that he had also come for another reason. "I'll take it," he said rudely. The old woman felt in her pocket for her keys and went into the other room behind the curtain. The young man, left alone in the middle of the room, was listening with curiosity and figuring things out. She could be heard opening the chest of drawers. Must be the top drawer, he figured, so she carried the keys in her right pocket, all in one bunch on a steel ring, and there's one key, the biggest and 3 times bigger, with a tooth bit. Certainly not for a drawer. It means there's also some coffer or trunk. Now that's curious. Trunks always have keys like that. But how mean this all is. The old woman came back. "Here you are, dearie. If it's 10 kopecks to the ruble per month, you'll owe me 15 kopecks on 1.5 rubles for the month to come. And you also owe me the 20 kopecks for the same reckoning for the previous 2 rubles. That makes 35 altogether. I now owe you altogether 1 ruble and 15 kopecks for your watch. Here, take it, sir." "What's now? It's 1 ruble and 15 kopecks? Right, sure, sir." The young man didn't argue and took the money. He looked at the old woman and made no move to leave, as if he still wanted to say or do something, but he himself did not seem to know precisely what. One of those days, Alyona Ivanovna, I may bring you yet another thing. Silver nice, a cigarette case. Once I get it back from a friend of mine. He became confused and fell silent. "So we'll talk then, dearie. Goodbye." "And you stay at home alone like this. Your sister's not here?" He asked as casually as he could, walking out to the entryway. "What business do you have with her, dearie?" "Nothing special, I just asked. Right away. Goodbye, Alyona Ivanovna." Raskolnikov went out decidedly troubled. The trouble kept increasing more and more. On his way down the stairs, he even stopped several times as he was suddenly struck by something, and finally, already in the street, he exclaimed, "Oh God, how loathsome this all is! And can it be the night? No, it's not. It's absurd," he added resolutely. "Could such horror really come into my head? Then, what filth my heart is capable of? Above all, filthy, nasty, vile, and for the whole month, But neither words nor exclamations could express his agitation. The feeling of boundless loathing that had begun to oppress and sicken his heart while he was still only on his way to the old woman now reached such proportions and became so clearly manifest that he did not know where to flee from his anguish. He went down the sidewalk like a drunk man, not noticing the passers-by and running into them. He was in the next street before he came to his senses. Looking around, he noticed that he was standing by a pot-house, the entrance to which was downstairs from the sidewalk in the basement. At the same moment, 2 drunks came walking out the door, supporting and cursing each other back to the street. Without another thought, Raskolnikov immediately went down the stairs. He had never gone into pot-houses before, but his head was spinning now. And besides, he was tormented by a burning thirst. He wanted to drink some cold beer, all the more so in that he attributed his sudden weakness to hunger. He sat down in a dark and dirty corner at a sticky little table, asked for beer, and greedily drank the first glass. He immediately felt all relieved, and his thoughts became clear. "It's all nonsense," he said soberly. "There's nothing to be troubled about. Just some physical disorder. 1 glass of beer, a piece of dry bread, and see, in an instant the mind gets stronger, the thoughts clear, the intentions firmer. Pah! How paltry it all is!" But in spite of the scornful spitting, he already looked cheerful, as if he had freed himself all at once from some terrible burden and cast an admirable glance around at the people there. Yet even at that moment he had a distant foreboding that all his receptiveness to the good was also morbid. There were a few people left in the pot-house by then. Just after the 2 drunks he had run into on the stairs, a whole bunch left together, 5 men or so, with 1 wench and an accordion. After then, the place became quiet and roomy. There remained 1 man who looked like a tradesman drunk, but not very, sitting over a beer. His friend, fat and enormous in a tight-waisted coat with a grey beard, who was quite drunk and dozed off on a bench, and every once in a while, as if half awake, He would suddenly start snapping his fingers, spreading his arms wide and jerking the upper part of his body without getting up from the bench, while he sang some gibberish, trying to recall the verses, something like, "The whole year long he loved his wife. The whole year long he loved his wife." Or again, suddenly waking up, "Down Podjecheskaya he did go. He met a girl he used to know." But no one shared his happiness. His silent friend even looked upon all these outbursts with hostility and mistrust. There was yet another man there who, in appearance, resembled a retired official. He was sitting apart over his little crack, taking a sip every once in a while and looking around. He also seemed somewhat agitated.